I got an interesting email recently from a patron on Patreon, and I actually get this kind of email a lot. It's people who are self-defined as Buddhist conservatives or right-wingers, and they kind of, in private, come out to me. I don't know why. And they want to know what I think about this. So I thought I would address the topic of Buddhist right-wingers in today's video. Now here we go. I will not name the person because they are worried about coming out publicly as a Buddhist conservative. So let's see let's call this person Deep Throat. Deep Throat says, "Hi! I keep writing you long messages and then erasing them, but essentially I'm a supporter on Patreon, but I find myself right of center politically at this point, and I wondered what you thought of Zen practitioners who don't align with the Buddhist left." So let's take the first part of my patron's email just at face value. What do I think about Buddhist right-wingers? I think you're fascist pigs! No, I haven't met too many sort of Buddhist right-wingers or Zen right-wingers, but in my experience, y'all tend to be pretty well-versed in the facts, and you tend to have your arguments clear. So you've thought through your political views pretty deeply. That is my personal experience of the few Buddhist right-wingers that I've met. And of course, I think the reason for this is you guys are the ideological minorities. I mean, especially in Southern California, where I was practicing Zen Buddhism. I mean, it was really hard to find a Mitt Romney supporter. For example, at the monastery back in 2012, probably got that wrong. Anyways, it was hard to find in our monastery or at our temple in Los Angeles anybody who was pro Mitt Romney, right? Ironically, my teacher, like my 105-year-old Japanese Zen master who knew absolutely nothing about American politics, yet had no problem continually weighing in. I could not tell if he was live trolling me half the time, but my memory is he was kind of sick at that time, and so we were in his apartment a lot, and me and his attendant were watching the debates, Obama and Mitt Romney, and I remember, he couldn't understand them, but we were watching them in front of him, and I remember him being like, "Oh, maybe the Mormon okay, maybe Obama not good, not adult politician, maybe the Mormon okay." So we're like, I was such a naive little liberal back then, and I was like, "Oh no, Roshi, no. Mitt Romney, not good, Roshi. Yokonai, not good, Yokonai. Obama, good, Roshi. Obama, good." And Roshi's like, "Oh, I don't know." And I had heard rumors, I don't know if this is true, there was a monk who told me that my teacher, this Zen master, whom I had the greatest respect and even devotion to, was a Bush supporter, a George W. Bush supporter. And when I heard that, my eyes popped out of my skull sockets and my head spun around in circles. I couldn't believe it. How could somebody who was, a great Zen master possibly be pro-George W. Bush, whom I did not support? Well, I was very naive back then. I was a sort of a card-carrying liberal, and I thought that if someone was a great spiritual teacher, well, then naturally they had liberal points of view on political issues and on cultural issues. But I don't really think that anymore. The older I get, the more I begin to see that people and politics are very complex. I was rigid in my youth. I was like a conservative liberal, if you will. Actually, I was raised in a conservative household and in the Reagan era. And I didn't sort of outgrow that mode until I got into college, and I was really surrounded by a bunch of conservatives, and I tend to be contrarian. So I defined myself, my character and my politics kind of against the strain of values in that environment. And then when I went to Los Angeles after college, I became more liberal. I don't know why I'm telling you my politics. It's really not relevant. I don't even really know what they are anymore. I find myself a bit adrift sometime. Maybe this is something that happens when you've lived half a century of life on this planet. Like suddenly you arrive in your middle age and you think, I got everything worked out. And then suddenly there's a whole new generation of kids who have been doing stuff behind your back for like 20 years. Like you just saw them as like little kids playing around, and then they got a little bit older, and then you haven't been paying attention to them. But suddenly they became adults and teenagers, and they have totally their own points of view. And they have very different interpretations and definitions of what it means to be liberal and Democrat, and what it means to be progressive, and what it means to be conservative and Republican and far right. And suddenly you're like, what are you guys doing? You changed the definitions of everything. So truly, in today's environment, I don't know exactly where I stand anymore, and fortunately, you didn't ask. But I will say, I try to keep an open mind these days because things are very tricky. I mean, well, let's go back to my Deep Throat's email to kind of explore this topic maybe a little bit more, and then we're going to come to some conclusions. So he says, I'm wondering what you think of Buddhist practitioners who don't align with the Buddhist left. We covered that. Now let's go to this part. He says, I'm honestly not brave enough to admit that he doesn't align with the political left. I'm afraid to admit this to my teachers who are vocally left Democrats. So I want to touch on this point a little bit, and then maybe we'll get to the rest of his message. I don't know that we need to, because I think this is an important one. So he says, my teacher, I'm saying he, I mean they, Deep Throat has teachers, perhaps I think maybe it's a wife and a husband team, I'm not sure. I've got all these ideas and images in my head. Deep Throat has a wife and has a team of 2 teachers, right? And his teachers are very far left, right? And I asked him, I was like, well, how do you even know that they're left wing? Like, are they running around bringing their politics into the Zendo? And Deep Throat says, easy question. Yeah, they do bring it into the Zendo, and they discuss things like climate change, gun control, etc., as if they are Zen subjects not up for debate, rather than political positions. So I think this is happening more and more in American Zen communities. It's happening everywhere. Well, I'll just speak to the Zen communities. It seems to me that certain teachers in certain communities, the leadership in those communities feel some pressure to speak out on issues, or feel obliged to speak out on some issues, or just feel totally comfortable sharing their opinions on political issues because they feel like most everybody agrees with them. My take on this is no. Don't bring your politics into the Zendo. I find that suspect. If you're running around with your MAGA hat on, saying Trump is a great Zen trickster who should be elected, I don't think you should be doing that. I don't see that happening as much. Mostly what I see happening is a kind of blanket acceptance of a sort of a middle of the road progressive values or virtues in Zen communities, in Tricycle Magazine, in Lion's Roar, but I don't think people should be bringing politics into the Zendo. Like, you're not historians, probably. You're not political experts, nor is it your place to be lecturing people on politics in a Zendo. I mean, just use your head for one thing. Like, if you have some conservative practitioners, like, don't you think they want an example of the Dharma instead of a lecture on politics? And if you give them an example of the Dharma that's clear and clean and doesn't tilt into that heated California liberal zone that we sometimes get into, I know I did when I was out there, if you tip into that area, it's bad press for Buddhism. It's bad press for Zen. And I just don't personally feel like that belongs in a Zendo. And I'm suspect of the insight and the capabilities of teachers who are not clear on what is Dharma and what is Zen, and then what is politics. Now, there's a difference between being a Zen teacher and having political opinions, and then presuming that your political opinions are the only opinions that someone can have if they are a true Dharma practitioner. I think there's a creep happening sometimes. There's a creep in perspectives, like politics creeping into the Zendo. And my fear is when this happens in liberal circles is always the same. It's like, if you don't hold certain values above your political opinions, then sooner or later the wingnuts are going to figure this out, and they're going to turn it against you. So sooner or later, there's going to be a swing towards the right in American Buddhism, and then there's going to be all kinds of politics brought into the Zendo from American right-winger Buddhists, because all the left-winger Buddhists were doing it for the longest period of time. I just watched some footage that I just shot on this topic, and I'm not happy with it. I'm not happy with this video so far. I have approached this subject before on this channel, and I've never been happy with how I've talked about it, and none of you are ever happy either, because I get your emails. I get tweets and emails from conservative Buddhists who are like, dude, come on. Like, you're giving these insipid, semi-woke opinions because you don't want to offend the left. Then every once in a while from the left, I'll get someone who will say, gosh, so glad you're seeing both points of view. My trans friend who committed suicide, maybe equivocation isn't what people who are truly suffering in his position need. And I completely sympathize with both points of view, and I never seem to be able to get at what I'm saying with this topic. So let me put it like this. My teacher used to talk about true democracy, and he used to say, true democracy, maybe one day it will come to America. Now, here's what I think that means. Okay, for me, there are certain values that it behooves us to hold above our political opinions. It doesn't mean, because this is so tricky, we can't stand up for certain opinions. And vote based on them or have them. It doesn't mean that we should be, quietistic in our politics or ambiguous But for me, what it means is, so take, for example, the principle of free speech. Now, and democracy. So for me, the principle of democracy and the principle of free speech that goes along with it, for me, what that means is there is a zone, a public square, a space, an openness, an open space where people who don't know everything, who don't maybe know anything, can come together and they can meet. And it's a trucker, for example, who voted for Trump, and a college professor who voted for Biden, and a trans person who's conservative, and a conservative housewife who's pro-abortion, and on and on. Like, it's a space where people can come together. This is democracy, and change their minds. But most importantly, can come together, meet, and interact, and fight, and quarrel, and mix it up. And my teacher would call it like plus and minus, and male and female, and birth and death, and left and right, and up and down. You have all these different principles. They come together, and they meet, and they interact, and a little bit of the Democrat gets in the Republican, and a little bit of the liberal gets in the conservative, and from that, something new is born. Something richer and deeper arises. So I can't possibly, I guess as a liberal, get it all right. You know, and no liberal or conservative gets it all right. And I think it's more Zen to be open-minded, and this requires getting offline, and it requires, for example, for Deep Throat, who emailed me, I think it requires his teachers, their teachers, to maybe open up the floor and ask other people for their opinions, and maybe hear Deep Throat out, for example. It just doesn't strike me as being very Buddhist to sit up there and pontificate, or very Zen to sit up there and pontificate. You need to let in the enemy, and you need to absorb the enemy, and from that absorption of the enemy, some greater point of view is born. You can't do it on your own. You don't know it on your own. In fact, I'm going to run out of the room right now, and I'm going to grab a quote that my teacher made on this topic that I think is relevant. Hold on. So in this quote, in a book called About to Talk at the Zen, my teacher is talking about negating the self, or not believing in yourself, in the sense of, I know everything, I am solid, I am fixed, I am here, there is a thing called me, etc., etc. This is called anatta. We talked about this before. So my teacher said the self should be wiped out. He says, why should such a self be wiped out? One could say that the answer to this question is extremely simple. As long as it has something to avoid, the self is being wiped out because of the one it was trying to avoid. What the self has to avoid is what opposes the self. For the self, having a world that protects it is reassuring. From the perspective of such a world of the self, or from the perspective of a group, avoiding opponents may appear preferable. Yet opponents will not disappear. And as long as there are opponents, one cannot find inner peace. Upon careful reflection, the opponents that one was trying to avoid were living together with the self. They were friends. They were one's mother. Literally, in my case. My mom and I are always arguing about politics. You know? I mean, I was hoping when she got cable she wouldn't get Fox News, but she did. Anyways, Once it has become aware of this, the self will happily proceed onto the path where it will be wiped out. Namely, it will reverse the path trodden by the self by spontaneously proceeding to walk the path where it becomes the content of the person it has tried to avoid. So my teacher seems to be saying that the path of Zen, of the Tathagata practitioner, like you're trying to avoid your opponent, and eventually you realize that the opponent you were trying to avoid is your mother. And then you walk the path of self-negation. You walk the path where you become the content of the person you have tried to avoid. And I think when this happens, a deeper politics is born, something even deeper than politics. It's like connection is born. Like connection, I'm a person and you're a person. Oh, that's how you think. For example, Deep Throat believes in making abortion illegal. But that's because Deep Throat has a strong belief in the sanctity of human life. So Deep Throat is also anti-death penalty, anti-war. He's anti-abortion. So Deep Throat, who's a Buddhist right-winger, has a different interpretation of compassion. But it's not that he's not compassionate. Look, I know it's really, really hard, especially as we begin to head into a political season. It's really, really hard to keep an open mind and an open heart. Man, I've made this plea so many times before, and I'm just making it to myself because I sit here across the drink. I live in Austria, and I watch a lot of American political unfoldings in the media, and it's so hard to stay objective. They're so good at triggering anger and self-righteousness. And I can be totally angry at like crazy woke shit, and then I turn around and I'm totally angry, like apoplectic, that the conservatives are backing lunatic candidates and having lunatic positions. It's like I got no home politically. Well, I don't think that that's healthy. I think it's healthier to find a person that you disagree with politically and open your heart and open your mind to them and receive them. Now, it's not always so easy to do, but in the case of Deep Throat, his teachers, their teachers, should be doing this for them, right? Like they shouldn't be just spewing a bunch of political opinions that they're totally taking for granted and assuming that everybody in their community takes for granted. I feel they should be opening up the floor and practicing and manifesting true democracy and creating a vibrant space where something deeper than just a one-sided political view can be born. Or just shut the F up about politics entirely and teach people Dharma. That's probably the way to go. That's what people come for. They come for something deeper than the political flavor of the moment, whether it's either the right or the left. Friends, thanks for hearing me out. Thanks for listening once again to my somewhat ambiguous position on politics. I hope you got something out of this video. If you did, you can join me over on Patreon to support this channel. I've got a link right here. You can click on that link. I believe that link is patreon.com/Shozan Jack Hobner. Got some essays over there, got some blogs. We also are doing sits with the Sangha, my Patreon Sangha. Meditation sits, we do that on Sunday, 6 p.m. Austrian time, and I list all the times in America time. It's really nice having a little Sangha to sit with. So if you want to be part of that, if you want to support this channel, please come on over to Patreon. But you don't got to do it. I offer these things for free. Anyways, keep your heads clear, your hearts open, and your, keep your knees from quaking. I don't know what that means. I'm a fucking idiot. Goodbye.